In this video, we will learn to factor trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where the coefficient of x squared is 1. Let's quickly review distribution. Let's multiply x minus 6 times x minus 7. When we multiply two polynomials, we multiply each term of the first polynomial to each term of the second polynomial. X times x is x squared. X times negative 7 is negative 7x. Negative 6 times x is negative 6x. Negative 6 times negative 7 is positive 42. Then we need to combine the two middle terms. So we have x squared, negative 7x and negative 6x, that's negative 13x plus 42. Now, here are a couple of questions that we will answer. How is the middle term formed? Well, the middle term, the negative 13x, it's formed by adding the negative 7 and the negative 6, which happen to be the second terms in each binomial. How is the last term formed? The last term is formed by multiplying negative 6 and negative 7. So the middle term is formed by adding negative 6 and negative 7. The last term is formed by multiplying negative 6 and negative 7. When we factor, we take this trinomial x squared plus bx plus c, and we write this as a product of two binomials. I'm going to call this x plus b1 times x plus b2. So factoring is taking a trinomial and writing it as a product of two binomials. We have three different cases. Now, we learned in the previous slide that the last term is formed by multiplying the m and the n. So if the last term is positive, we have two options. We can either have two positives or we can have two negatives. But if the last term is positive and the middle term is also positive, that means the m and the n, they both must be positives, since we add the m and the n to get the middle term. If we have a second case, x squared minus bx plus c, where the last term is positive, the middle term is negative, then we must have two negatives, since a negative times a negative is a positive, but negative plus negative will yield a negative. If the last term is negative, remember the last term is formed by the product of the m and the n. The only way to get a product of two numbers to be negative is if you have one positive and one negative. So we have one positive and one negative. So a quick recap. If the last term is positive, we either get two positives or two negatives. If the last term is negative, we get one positive and one negative. And when we factor, we always factor out the GCF first. Let's start with this example. Let's factor x squared plus 8x plus 15. Now, because our last term is positive and our middle term is always also positive, we have case 1. In case 1, we have x plus something times x plus something. Now remember that these two numbers, they multiply to be 15. So since these two numbers, we know they have to multiply to 15, let's list all the factors of 15. And when we list the factors of any number, we always start with 1. So don't start with 5 and 3, because then you might forget factors in the middle. So there's 1 and 15. 2 does not go into 15. 3 goes into 15 5 times, and that's it. The factors of 15 are 1 and 15, 3 and 5. We also know that these numbers that multiply to 15 must add to 8. So the factor pair we're going to choose is 3 and 5, which means our answer will be x plus 3 times x plus 5. Let's check to make sure we did this correctly. If you distribute this, if you multiply these, we should get x squared plus 8x plus 15. X times x is x squared. X times 5 is 5x. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 5 is 15. If we add our two middle terms, this will give us x squared plus 8x plus 15, which is our original trinomial. So this is the correct factored form. Let's look at another example. Let's factor x squared minus 18x plus 72. Since the last term is positive, we know we have to get two positives or two negatives. But the middle term is negative, which means we need to get case 2, which is x minus m times x minus n, because two negatives multiply to be a positive, but they add to be a negative. First, let's look for a greatest common factor. X squared minus 18x plus 72 has no GCF, so we can skip that. Then we will write which case we have. This is case 2, so we're going to have x minus something times x minus something. So these two numbers, they have to both be negatives. Let's list all the factors of 72 starting with 1. There's -1 and -72. There's -2 and -36. There's -3 and -24. There's -4 and -18. 5 doesn't go into 72. There's -6 and -12. 7 doesn't go into 72. And then there's -8 and -9. Once we get to 9, then it goes in reverse, so we can stop once these numbers get close to each other. Now, from this list, we need to find two numbers that add to be -18. And the pair that adds to -18 is -6 and -12. So our factored form will be x minus 6 times x minus 12. Let's check to make sure we did this correctly. If you multiply x times x, that is x squared. X times -12 is -12x. -6 times x is -6x. -6 times -12 is positive 72. If we add the middle terms, this is x squared minus 18x plus 72. Since this gives us our original trinomial, this factored form is correct. It's always helpful to check your answer. Okay, third example, we have x squared plus 3x minus 40. Since the last term is negative, the only way two numbers can multiply to be a negative is if you have one positive and one negative. So if we factor this, we're going to get case 3, x plus something times x minus something. These numbers have to multiply to -40. So let's start with 1. We have -1 and 40. The only way two numbers multiply to be a -40 is one is negative, one is positive, which is why we have different signs. There's -2 and 20. -3 does not go into 40. There's -4 and 10. There's -5 and 8. And then -6, -7 don't go into -40, and then we get back to 8. So we can stop here. These are all the factors of -40. We need to find the pair that adds to positive 3. So this pair will be -5 and 8. So this is x minus 5 and x plus 8. Okay, let's quickly check to see if we did this correctly. X times x is x squared. X times -5 is -5x. 8 times x is positive 8x. 8 times -5 is -40. Let's add the two middle terms. This gives us x squared plus 3x minus 40, which is absolutely correct. Okay, one more example. Let's factor 4x squared minus 20x plus 56. Now the first step to any factoring problem is to look for the greatest common factor and factor it out. So between 4, -20, and -56, our GCF is 4. Between x squared and x, well, the 56 doesn't have a variable, so our GCF is only 4. X is not a common factor. So let's first factor out the GCF. If we divide each term by 4, we have x squared minus 5x minus 14. Okay, now let's factor the trinomial in the parentheses, x squared minus 5x minus 14. We know this will be case 3 because the last term is negative. So we're going to get one positive and one negative. We know these two numbers have to multiply to -14, so let's list all the factors of -14. There's -1 and 14. There's -2 and 7. And then nothing else goes into 14 besides 1 and 2, so this is it. Now we need these two numbers to add up to be a -5. So -2 and 7 kind of works because 7 minus 2 is 5, but we want the 5 to be a negative. So when this happens, all we need to do is we need to reverse the signs. The 2 is positive and the 7 is negative. Because 2 times -7 is still -14, but 2 plus -7 is -5, which is why we want the 2 to be positive and the 7 to be negative. And I will leave you to check this answer. When you do check, make sure you distribute first, multiply first, and then multiply by the 4.